Great Britain's Jonas Dodoo is one of the top sprint coaches in the world, having coached guys under 10 seconds and women close to 11 seconds. I was fortunate enough to catch up with Coach very recently. In part 1 of this interview, he talks about his speed philosophy and how he tries to keep things simple, and we also discuss acceleration and the use of resisted methods. I was very interested to find out about his ideas on the tactics of sprinting as well as the techniques.
Traditionally and repeatedly, I go into rugby clubs, football clubs, or I have track and field guys, coaches who are usually well read. You know, they've read everything online and they've seen the videos and stuff, but are still struggling to integrate things into their philosophy, or at least simply. Because I think, you know, when someone is clear on their philosophy, when it's really simple. And so, you know, the key things that I try to talk about, and at least the place I like to start from, is identifying the difference between the technique and the tactics of sprinting. And I think when we talk about the techniques or aspects of technique of sprinting, I'm probably only talking about one particular step in a sprint, and I've tried to summarize it in a way that it can apply to any step, be it acceleration or transition or max velocity, and also actually in team sports it where applicable can transfer to change of direction. But essentially I think we're looking at three things. We're looking at projection, and we're integrating the torso into the projection puzzle, and because basically if you control the torso, you can control the orientation of your projection. I think we're talking about reactivity, and the ability to create stiffness and short ground contact times and everything associated with large forces in short amounts of time. And we're talking about switching. And really that's just limb exchange, the ability to have a reflexive extension that is coupled with a flexion of the opposite leg, and then reverse that action to exchange the limbs really effectively. And that's where I start and finish really when it comes to technique of sprinting. We can talk about ankle joint, and we can talk about, you know, dorsiflex ankle, and we can talk about pre-activation of the swing leg in order to really spike the ground contact force curve, and we can talk about a lot of things after that, but that's where I like to start.
So you talk about the tactics of sprinting.
And then the tactic of sprinting for me is more about energy distribution, how you best blend your stride length and frequency, or your projection and reactivity. I think they're inherently connected and very similar things. How you blend and distribute those things from the beginning all the way to the end of the race. And to me, that rhythmical change and gradual and exponential change of stride length, exponential reduction of ground contact time, an exponential increase of speed and velocity for acceleration into max velocity, that blend, I think, is all about the tactic of how you apply your technique.
And that's a very interesting point. I mean, we could go on. How does the athlete appreciate that tactical implementation? Is that something they would have to work on all the time in training?
Dan Pfaff told me, and I definitely believe that you can work on acceleration, work on max velocity, and actually start to create some stability over an athlete's career. But the one thing that will always change is and one thing that will always be puzzling will be their transition. And that's essentially because the stronger you get, or when you're fresh, or when you're tired, and as your max velocity increases, the most important thing is how you blend your acceleration into your max velocity. And that blend can either make your max velocity phase difficult or challenging and reduce the time spent at max velocity, or it can make it simple and easy and make it really easy to carry max velocity, not just at a higher speed but for longer distances. so that the athletes appreciate it, and really the word and the feeling is gradual. Everything and building. It's words that almost suggest that the run isn't finished just when you feel like you've got momentum. You have to maintain pressure all the way through the race, and in order to do that, you need to know what it's like to feel like you're building to your max velocity, and also the almost the negatives of not doing that. And we talk about getting stuck in your acceleration, or we talk about popping up into your max velocity, and those are probably the two ends of a spectrum. Some people, if they project themselves horizontally for too long and don't raise their center of mass, they get stuck in acceleration, and then they have to force themselves up, either force themselves up to where the right position is, or usually into the wrong position, and then it's just a very long way home from that point. And some people pop up out of the acceleration, getting themselves upright really quickly, really soon, and don't continue to increase their stride length with their ground contact time. So they may look like they're running on the spot. And again, both issues reduce the speed that you can get to, and also make the tail end of the race really difficult.
From the technical point of view, different sprinters, I guess, are going to have different force application abilities. So how do you coach the different abilities at the same time? Or how do you work out that one needs more time to accelerate, perhaps, compared to another? Is it something you see straight away?
Yeah, you want everyone to extend and their acceleration as far as possible. And I think what's important to recognize is acceleration doesn't only happen in a horizontal body position at an angle. I think people assume acceleration ends when the athlete is upright. I think acceleration ends when you stop getting faster. And for some people, the 2/3 of the acceleration is done in the upright phase. But many people assume that once they're upright, that the acceleration ends and they just have to hold. But that's why I was mentioning the whole exponential change of stride length and ground contact time with velocity. If you can keep your stride length growing and your ground contact time reducing, or at least stabilizing, you'll keep getting faster. So it doesn't just happen in horizontal planes. So I mean to answer your question, I think we work backwards. We make sure people are clear on what max velocity is, on what the postures are. We may not be moving at max velocity in training, but we make sure they're clear on the positions, the timing, the rhythm, and then we work backwards from that point. And essentially, as long as your acceleration, especially your early acceleration, you can get yourself into that upright posture. The question is, how brave can you be? How close to the red line can you be of getting stuck? So people get stuck because they want to make the most of those horizontal postures, of those angled acceleration postures. So in training, as long as you know what upright is, the question is, can you express your acceleration, your early acceleration, and still get to that seamless position, or seamlessly get to your max velocity position? So how do we figure it out? Well, through practice. And very early stages of speed training, we may not be extending the acceleration as far as possible, but gradually more and more, the closer we get to a point where we want these guys to be running or as closer we get to competition phase, the further and further these guys will be accelerating and pressing and pushing their max velocity further and further down the line. So I think it's always trial and error. But there are some key things that we use acceleration ladders and cones for. There are some key bits of data that we get out of our OptiJump and our LabEgg that may give us a clue towards if an athlete needs a bit more time.
Can you explain the benefits?
Yeah, so I think resistance sprinting is important for me for a number of reasons. I think you can use resistance sprinting for similar reasons for why you may do hill runs. I think it slows down the movement. It makes being horizontal simple. It makes it allows you, so your peak power within the sprint, so all of JB Marin's work kind of alludes to the fact that you only have peak power for about a couple milliseconds at around the 1 to 1.5 second point of your sprint. Everything after that is explosive reactive in nature. Okay, so what's the point? The point is that if you use resisted sprinting and you can find an optimal load for developing peak power, you can spend more time, more reps, more steps actually training around that peak power zone. And by all means, you need to surf the curve. You need to make sure you develop maximal strength as well as reactive strength. So just training at peak power isn't ideal for the year round. But what it does is it's important to recognize that you can get to 50% or 40% of your top speed within just 4 to 5 steps. So the reality is there are some really important things happening in your first 4 to 5 steps that set up the momentum and the rhythm for the rest of the whole run. And resisted sprints just allow you to repeatedly work on those 4 to 5 steps again and again and again and again. If you talk to a strength coach and asked him what kind of stimulus it was creating, actually it creates a really specific stimulus for your hip extensors, for your lumbar spine, for teaching you how to stabilize your torso and create lumbar pelvic dissociation. You know, be able to extend your hip whilst stabilizing your spine. It enables you really to work technically on the important things that you need for acceleration, as well as creating a stimulus that's really specific to acceleration, not just because of the angle and the fact that you're orientating your force in the direction you want to accelerate, but also because it's working the muscles that are important for those forces. So I think there are a number of different reasons why resisted sprinting is important, and an important part of my philosophy and my program. And then we use an exogeny, and an exogeny is a really important device for us because it's a pulley system. And what it allows us to do is, if we're running over 20 or 25 meters, the resistance will stay relatively similar from the beginning to the end. It will reduce a tiny bit, but not a lot. Whereas when you pull a sled, once the sled's got some momentum, generally it just keeps moving with that momentum. So you can spend 4 or 5 steps producing the force, and then actually the required forces after that are a lot less. So we use a pulley. There's a lot of different units. You guys have talked about the 1080. There are different ways of doing it. The great thing about the exogeny is it's cheap and cheerful, and it gets the job done.
If you load